Our guest today may have one of the coolest jobs in dentistry. He chases and catches those who steal from dentists and orthodontists. David Harris is the CEO of Prosperident, the world's largest firm investigating financial crimes committed against dentists. He is also a forensic accountant, a licensed private investigator, a CPA, and the author of the book Dental Embezzlement, The Art of Theft and the Science of Control. He's written over 30 articles for dental industry publications and is a frequent presenter at regional, national, and international dental conferences. David, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Richie. Great to be here with you.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic. When I hear about it, I don't think of it as being that prevalent in the industry. Can you tell us how prevalent it really is?
Yeah, and I'll start by saying it's a lot more prevalent than we traditionally thought.
Yeah.
The number that I've given for years when somebody asks me about their lifetime probability of being stolen from was about 70%. And that was based on a couple of studies done around 10 years ago.
Yeah.
There was one released in February of this year. So this was done by the American Dental Association, and it's not specific to ortho, but the ortho numbers aren't terribly different.
Mm-hmm.
Where they asked 17,000 dentists, have you been embezzled from?
Yeah.
And 47% of them said yes.
And those are the ones admitting to it, of course.
Well, those are the ones who know about it, who admitted to it. But even if you leave that part aside, just simply double that number, because on average they were asked at the midpoint of their careers. If you double that number, the true probability is something more than 90%.
That is very scary. Okay.
In terms of orthodontists, what I can tell you is that they represent about 6% of the community of dentists as a whole,
mm-hmm.
but they're around 9% of our caseload.
Oh, so it's more prevalent in orthodontics.
If that is possible, it seems like it's even more likely in ortho than in the rest of dentistry.
I wonder, is the gross revenue higher, maybe?
I don't think that's a factor. Embezzlement doesn't happen in general because of factors related to the practice.
Yeah.
It really happens because somebody who's working there wakes up one day and says, today I feel more entitled to the doctor's revenue than he or she is.
Entitled.
Entitled's the word, and that can happen anywhere.
Absolutely, I'm sure. So you wouldn't blame it on the doctor for that feeling happening, of course.
I'd never blame this on a doctor. I mean, nobody, no matter how attentive or inattentive they are to running their practice, nobody should be stolen from.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's no circumstance where that's okay.
So why are these people stealing? What are their
Well, they steal for two reasons: need or greed. And needy thieves steal because their back's against the wall financially. They're 2 months behind in their mortgage. They're about to lose their house, and they're stealing to buy groceries.
Also, that might be higher right now, those motivations.
Well, I was going to say, there's going to be a lot of displacement in the economy, and, the current shutdown is part of it, but there's going to be some longer term changes. I mean, where I am, all the restaurants are shut down, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And the head of the local restaurant association was interviewed the other day, and he said, I fully expect somewhere between 10 and 15% of these restaurants will not reopen.
Wow.
So there's going to be some displacement in the longer term, but in the short term, you're absolutely right. There are people not receiving paychecks right now. And that means that some families that used to be 2-income families are suddenly 1-income family.
Gotcha.
Does that mean automatically that those people will steal? Of course not, but some of them will. So we have needy thieves, and then we also have greedy thieves. And greedy thieves steal out of a sense of entitlement, and there's that word. These people think that society is not paying them what they're truly worth, and they steal to take what they think they should be receiving.
So they view it as they should be receiving this anyway, so they're totally justified in their actions.
That's right, because every thief needs to be able to rationalize. So we've all learned from the time we were 3 years old that it's wrong to take other people's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And every thief has to get to the point where they say, well, I know that in general it's wrong to steal, but it's okay in this case because.
Oh, wow.
Because, and what comes after that word because is interesting, you know, because the doctor would only waste it anyway, or because she's underpaying me, or because whatever. But they all have to get to the point where they can rationalize what they're doing. But greedy thieves are interesting. I mean, they like the money they steal, but it's not really why they do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They do it to address an ego deficit as opposed to a financial one.
Gotcha.
We have one of our alumni, as we lovingly call them, who was stealing, and then she won $3 million in the state lottery.
Okay.
So if most employees in an ortho practice won $3 million in the lottery, they'd quit their job the next day.
You'd think.
And on the way out the door, they'd say those things they never dared say to the orthodontist before.
Well, yeah, of course.
This woman did neither of those things. She kept working.
Okay.
And she kept stealing. But here's the interesting amount, Richie. The amount she was stealing each month after she won $3 million actually went up.
It went up?
She was stealing more each month
and
as a millionaire. So it had nothing to do with financial need, at least at that point. She was getting some kind of biochemical rush from this, like you might from skydiving or bungee jumping or something, and she wanted it.
That's unbelievable. It's like football players are on the top of the world and they just do something stupid like dog fighting or something. Like, what's wrong with you? Their life is just giving you something so great, and that's a shame.
Yeah, I hadn't quite drawn that analogy till now, but you're so right.
Yeah, people aren't happy with what they've got, I guess. Wow, so need and greed, huh? So which one is more dangerous for the practice?
Probably greed. Needy thieves feel bad about it, but they just don't think they have any other choices. I mean, they've already borrowed all they can from friends and they've liquidated everything they can sell, and they're just out of choices. Yeah. So they feel remorseful about stealing, but they just don't see that they have a choice. And they tend to steal to fill that monthly hole in their finances.
So they at least see it as a right and wrong. It's just something that they have to do. Or the other person has justified it, so to them it's the right thing to do.
Which means that there's no upper limit to what they will steal.
Yeah.
They just do whatever they can. And you're right, there's no remorse there. So they're much more deadly to the practice. And these people tend to have a sociopathic streak. So they bring other things to the bargain too. I mean, this is the person who will blame other people for their mistakes. And a lot of times they can be an office bully as well.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot more that comes with it in the case of the greedy people. So
are there patterns of behavior that you can look out for to identify people like this in your office?
There absolutely are. And there are a lot of them, but I'll give you some to get the audience thinking. One thing that comes out over and over again in exit interviews with victims is territoriality on the part of the thief. So this is the person who's possessive about their job duties. It will even normally extend to their workspace and their computer. So this is the person who will get mad if somebody else in the practice sits at their desk or touches their computer.
Oh.
It's also the person who can be run off their feet with their job, but resist over and over again devolution of any part of their duties to anybody else, or even cross-training somebody else to do part of their job. Because if you think about it, cross-training sort of opens the door to somebody's job being divided up a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. So they're super protective of everything they're doing.
They are. This may be the person who refuses to take vacation. And that's not always the case with embezzlers, but a lot of times this person will be reluctant to be away from the office when it's open.
That's an odd trait, because I guess you probably think that's great. This person never takes vacation. They're always giving me value all the time.
Yeah, a lot of things embezzlers do tend to get misconstrued by the doctor as being hyper dedication.
Yeah.
The reason that people are reluctant to take vacation is it means that they lose control over the flow of information in the practice.
Yeah.
if patients or their responsible parties start calling with questions about their bills, for example, that are caused by what the embezzler is doing, the embezzler wants to be the person taking that phone call.
Oh, they need to control the communication.
They need to prevent that from escalating to the doctor. And when they're gone, they can't do that. Another thing that's similar, but for a little different reason, is that thieves often will try to work their schedule so that they get some alone time each week in the practice.
That's interesting. Motivation there seems a little more obvious.
Well, stealing takes concentration, and it's hard to do that with the phone ringing and patients coming and going through the office, and the doctor whipping around the place.
Yeah.
Whereas when if I come in on a Saturday afternoon when the practice is closed, it's much quieter, and I can muster the concentration, and also I just don't have the possibility that the doctor's going to poke his head into my workspace and say, "Oh, what are you doing?"
Yeah, less chance of getting caught, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, when you put doesn't want to take vacation together with works extra hours, although not necessarily working for the doctor, you're right. The picture that a lot of practice owners reach of this is somebody who's, as more than one victim described it, I thought she would take a bullet for me.
Yeah.
And she would, but only if she could resell it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I would definitely look at those as high performance indicators if I was doing a review at the end of the year.
Yeah, and let's be clear that not everybody who has a vacation reluctance or not everybody who works extra hours is automatically stealing. But when you start to assemble a whole picture of somebody, those are characteristics. And the story I often tell is my dad is an attorney. He's 86 years old. He retired 2 years ago.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Yeah. But in the last 10 years that he practiced, Richie, he never took vacation. It had nothing to do with embezzlement. My mom wasn't healthy enough to travel.
Yeah.
And so what that meant is that if my dad took time off, he'd end up sitting home with mom.
Yeah. Okay.
And they built their successful marriage on limiting the amount of time they spent together. And my dad just wasn't prepared to push the envelope. So
gotcha.
he went 10 years without vacation, and that was why. So we should never latch onto a single behavior and say, this person doesn't take vacation, therefore they must be stealing. That's not the way it should work. But when somebody doesn't take vacation, we need to understand why, because it's something that has some element of irrationality to it, and then decide if it's an issue.
And at least it's something you can kind of dig into your data and discover the pattern a little bit.
You could.
Are there other things like that where you can look the data somewhere that you can find that kind of indicates a tip?
There are a lot of them, but sometimes the analysis gets pretty technical.
I can imagine.
And I'm not sure necessarily that I want to turn your audience of orthodontists into a group of unpaid auditors.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Well, that said, how familiar should they be with their patient management system? What would you say?
Well, there's one of my sore points. A lot of, and let's be clear that in the clinical sense, being a successful orthodontist requires delegation. In fact, almost hyper-delegation.
I agree.
The thing that orthodontists struggle with on the business side is the difference, though, between delegation and abdication. Okay. And to me, delegation means I give somebody responsibility, but they have accountability back to me. And abdication happens when I say to somebody, I don't ever want to hear about that again.
Oh, just take it off my plate. And if no one complains, I'm happy about it. I've had managers like that.
And there's a line there that probably shouldn't be crossed. And unfortunately, a lot of orthodontists aren't really sure where it is. And one of the places where this manifests is, you're absolutely right. I ran into a lot of orthodontists who don't really even know the first thing about their practice management software.
Yeah.
Abdication.
Gotcha.
about 95% of what that software does is stuff that most orthodontists will not need to know or master to do their jobs. But there is the little bit they do need to know.
Mm-hmm.
They need to know how to look at a patient ledger and make sense of it. They need to know how to print reports. They need to be comfortable looking at those reports and understand what's in them. And they should have some idea of which reports are good ones to look at. So I'm not saying you need to be able to sit in your receptionist's desk or your financial coordinator's desk and do everything that person would do to do their job. Absolutely not. That's not realistic or practical.
Yeah.
However, you need to know enough.
Yeah, I agree. When I'm talking to someone from a marketing point of view, I always, do you have Google Analytics installed on your website? And I tell you, more than half the time, people either say no or I don't know.
Yeah.
And, they're saying they're spending thousands of dollars on marketing. So I'm like, to me, that just seems crazy. How can you not know what's working or not? That's like the most basic form of measurement for your success and your marketing efforts.
Practice management software is a really integral piece of a doctor's financial success. And unless you have some ability to gather information in it independently, you are beholden to the staff member who's handing it to you, and equally to their level of integrity. It's relatively easy for a staff member to construct reports that look like they're giving the true picture when they're not.
That's counterintuitive. I would think that
because it's software, it can't
would just spit out the report. It's a report, whatever it is, and you send it off. That's interesting.
Every report has parameters or assumptions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And if you let me print reports for you, I have control over those assumptions, not you.
Yeah.
Which means that if I want to, I can produce reports that lie. Wow. I'm not going to talk about how to do it here, but I can do it. So unless you as an orthodontist have the ability to gather some information independently, you're forever victim to somebody who says, all right, I'm going to feed the doctor some wrong info. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And I'm such a control freak from my point of view. I can't imagine doing that, but it is nice. I mean, if you're constantly doing other stuff to run the business, and it is different for orthodontists. They're forced to be small business owners at the same time, be a doctor and serve their patients. It's a tough.
Nobody ever chose dentistry or orthodontics because they really, really wanted to own a business.
Yeah. Right.
For everyone I've ever met, their great joy is in giving people terrific smiles, and running the business is kind of the unwanted stepchild in the marriage.
That's interesting. And I hear there's not a lot, even when they're in school, there's no marketing or business classes.
Very little. I mean, I guest lecture in a couple of programs. I mean, one I think of is the orthodontics residency at the Ohio State University, and it's a bit of an anomaly. You're right. There are lots of other programs that don't do that. So the OSU residents get a business course, and it's taught by an orthodontist who brings in guest lectures. And I'm privileged to be one of them. But
that's awesome.
Not every program does that. Very few dental schools do. And I guess at some level, there's an inherent compromise between should I learn more clinical stuff or should I learn non-clinical stuff?
Yeah.
And I guess we shouldn't really fault the profession for putting a priority on clinical education.
Of course, right.
But what it means is that some people come out a little bit ill-equipped for what comes next.
Wow. Are there any other behaviors that you just see in people?
Sure. One that is a little bit subtle probably is what I call conspicuous displays of honesty. Okay. So if you are a fundamentally honest person, you probably don't really feel the need to keep showcasing that for everybody. You just assume that everybody realizes that you have integrity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you don't have to keep drawing attention to it. So when when somebody makes a point of emphasizing how honest they're being or wanting to show somebody how honest they're being,
Yeah.
that's a contrary signal. In other words, that's a sign of dishonesty.
Wow, another counterintuitive piece of advice. Interesting.
A little bit. I was involved in a deposition of an embezzler a little while ago. So this is an embezzler who's being questioned by attorneys,
Mm-hmm.
and the deposition went on for probably an hour and a half. And during that hour and a half period, this woman must have said a dozen times the words, "I swear to God."
Wow.
Whatever came out of her mouth right after she said that was a big fat lie every single time.
What?
And if you think about people who are truly religious, I mean, they don't need to invoke the deity when they're being honest.
Yeah, that's true.
That just comes with being that religion of whatever faith they belong to.
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody says that over and over again, that says a lot about them. So the conspicuous display of honesty is one thing. Another pretty constant signal about embezzlement is the person who resists the involvement of outsiders. So from the perspective of a thief, I know my doctor pretty well. I know what she looks at and what she doesn't, and therefore I'm pretty well positioned to set up a plan to steal from her that won't get caught.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah.
But when the doctor says to me, "I have good news, we're going to bring in a consultant,"
Yeah.
or, "I'm bringing in the people from our practice management software to do some extra training," or our CPA is going to get a little more involved in what happens in the practice. I mean, in any of those cases, as an embezzler, that scares me.
Of course, it's a threat.
Because these are people who aren't beholden to me. I mean, they're not under my spell in the same way that the doctor typically is.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, these are people who think about the practice of orthodontics as a business and not a healing art.
Yeah.
So to an embezzler, this is all a huge threat. And if you talk to anybody who's in the consulting business in orthodontics, they all have a story about, I was hired by this office, and the day I showed up, the financial coordinator quit.
What? Okay.
Yeah. And of course, it's all about embezzlement.
Of course. So that's one reason to get one. At least talk about it.
Well, you can. I'll gently suggest that hiring us is probably a little cheaper and more direct solution to the problem. But
of course, just in general, yeah. Embezzlement specifically.
Whatever works.
That makes sense. So, what are some ways to prevent this?
I use the word prevent very carefully.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure there is such a thing. And there are lots of articles out there in the dental media about, 10 things you can do to prevent embezzlement in your practice.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always policies or procedures or controls. And this whole way of thinking is flawed.
Oh.
Let's say that you're an orthodontist and I work for you and my plan is to steal from you.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I come up with is, well, gee, if Dr. Ritchie lets me take the deposit to the bank, maybe I can just take some money out of the deposit.
Yeah, that'd be the easy way to do it.
And one of the things that these well-intentioned dabblers advocate is, doctor, you really should make the bank deposit yourself. So you outsmart me by taking the deposit to the bank yourself.
Yeah.
The question is, what do I do next? Do I give up my plan to steal from you and go home and join the church choir?
Yeah.
Or do I just say, I need a different plan?
Mm.
And I suspect we both know that the answer is the second one. In other words, your taking the deposit to the bank simply makes me an unrequited thief.
Yes.
And now I'm thinking about, well, what can I do instead? Because my need for money didn't change simply because Richie took the deposit to the bank himself. So now I'm looking for a workaround. I can tell you one of our staff sort of cataloged the different ways that we have found people to steal, and there are about 300 of them.
300?
Yeah.
That is
So,
very surprising.
so the idea that you can, change 5 things in your practice or 2 things or 20 things and frustrate me as a thief is fallacious.
Mm.
The other analogy I'll give people is it's kind of like, from the doctor's perspective, it's kind of like playing poker with somebody, but your cards are all face up.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Okay. Because as a thief, I know you.
Mm.
I know how you think. I know what you look at in the practice, and more to the point, what you don't.
Yes.
I know your habits. I know what the best day of the week is to steal from you.
Jeez.
And based on all that knowledge, I make my plan.
So is it worth trying to plug some of these holes at all?
Let's not be stupid, and let's eliminate the dumb thieves.
Gotcha.
But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that the things you would have to do to totally eliminate embezzlement in your practice are really unpalatable. I mean, a doctor asked me the other day, what can I do to make absolutely sure I don't get stolen from? And my answer was really simple. Tonight, when you leave the practice, turn out the lights, lock the door, and don't ever come back.
Oh, wow. Sure, that's what they wanted to hear.
Well, it probably wasn't. But let's talk about what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So what can
Because
you do?
Otherwise, those nice people in the audience are all going to be looking for Ativan, and I don't necessarily want to put them there. You can do a lot. The first thing I'll say is that orthodontics has gotten way out of step with how most of America hires.
That's okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, Richie, I could not get a job with FedEx delivering the junk that people buy on Amazon without passing a drug test.
Okay.
And yet I could work for virtually any of your clients without one.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Okay. Very few orthodontists drug test people before they hire them.
I
They
just
also
assume if
don't.
you have drugs in the office, you would have some sort of drug test.
Well, you don't necessarily have drugs, but you have prescription pads.
Yeah.
And if I'm a druggie, one of the best places I can work is some kind of dental practice. Now, I know most orthodontists probably prescribe narcotics very seldom, but they can.
Wow.
And as somebody who just wants to steal your prescription pads, it doesn't matter how often you do it. It just matters that you could.
Yeah.
Now, I know some orthodontists who don't even register with the DEA anymore, and that's great. But most have the ability to practice to prescribe narcotics. Another thing that is seldom done is a criminal records check. And I'm going to give you a statistic that will probably floor most of your audience.
Okay.
65 million Americans have criminal records. So that is 1 in 4 adults.
1 in 4 adults.
1 in 4 adults.
Wow.
Now, to be clear, not every criminal record should stop people from getting hired.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I would hope not.
In about 17 states now, marijuana is legal. When a state legalizes marijuana, they do not go back and wipe out the criminal records of people who were convicted for marijuana possession before legalization. Oh, yeah, so you can be in California where marijuana is legal and you can have a criminal record because 20 years ago in college, you got busted for possession. So that particular criminal record, at least for me, would not stop me from hiring somebody. On the other hand, somebody convicted of check fraud 2 years ago, I'm not going near.
Oh, yeah, it's a red alert.
It is. So,
and a lot of doctors aren't even doing that, so they have no idea this person's
that's the whole
writing
point.
bad checks all over town or something.
What happens is doctors make hiring decisions, or they allow their staff to make hiring decisions without a very good picture of who they're hiring. And there are people who just should never, ever have a job in an ortho practice who do. Wow. So we should be checking criminal records. We should be looking at credit history. And again, I'll say the same thing about credit. Bad credit doesn't mean don't hire this person. It means understand why they have bad credit and then make a decision about whether or not that poses a threat to your practice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you're looking at hiring somebody as an assistant, and they're a single parent with 2 kids, and they're not getting any help from the other parent. They're almost guaranteed to have bad credit, and that probably wouldn't bother me. On the other hand, you're looking at hiring somebody to be your treatment coordinator, and her husband's a contractor, and they live in the big house by the golf course, and they have 2 SUVs in the driveway, and they have bad credit. That should terrify a doctor.
Oh, that's interesting. I see what you're saying. It
Because
seems obvious after you say it, but
that's somebody who's not prepared to adjust their lifestyle to live within their means. And when there are other sources of other people's money dry up,
yeah.
the practice is next. So we need to be interpretive with this stuff, and we need to be able to put it into context and then make a decision. The problem with most orthodontists is they just don't have that basic information. And it would be kind of like treating patients without taking any radiography.
Oh, you're just going by your gut and hoping it's right,
Yeah.
huh? Yeah, that's not a good way to run your business.
I don't really care where the roots are. I mean, we'll just move the teeth and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And I mean, every orthodontist in the audience is probably shuddering at the thought of doing that, but that's exactly what they do when they hire people.
Would you suggest you do this with your existing staff now?
That's a whole different animal. And every staff member who's working for an orthodontist now has a contract, whether it's a formal written contract or it's simply an implied unwritten contract.
Okay.
And the way contract law works is that one party to a contract does not have the power to just go and unilaterally change it. So if you want to implement something like drug testing with your existing staff, then that needs to, first of all, you need to get very specific HR expertise. And there are several HR companies that deal specifically with dentists, and there's a state specific component to this. So each state has its own laws that govern it. So you need to go and get specific advice about something like that. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I think I would really be very interested in how many of my staff are high today.
Yeah.
But that's something that requires a lot of notice, and there's a protocol that would be specific to a situation as to how you put that kind of thing in place.
That makes sense.
Other things, although the only thing I'll mention is there may be some situations right now where staff have been laid off because of COVID, where you will be bringing them back as new hires. And if so, then that does give you the chance to.
Oh, you could have a different new hiring process and include it. Oh,
the other thing I'll mention about COVID too, and I talked about the economy that's going to be adjusting itself as people move from, industries that are going to be hit by this a lot harder to others. All that repositioning in the economy gives orthodontists a chance that they haven't had in a long time. And one thing I've heard consistently from orthodontists for about the last 5 years, in a booming economy with low unemployment, was that when they were hiring people, they never had a whole lot of choices from which to do it.
Oh, yes. The pool of people was less because of unemployment.
And orthodontists would say, I put out an ad in the usual media where we look for people, and, 2 people responded. Or people would ghost interviews because they would get a better job offer right in the middle of my application process. So orthodontists,
I've had that with interns recently.
Yeah. Orthodontists were scared to do a proper due diligence process because they thought it would take too long and they'd lose the opportunity. That's all about to change. There are going to be more people available when orthodontists reopen their practices than they have had in a long time, and they will have more choices. And for me, that's good news.
Absolutely. It's easier to get the cream of the crop and really build the practice.
It is. There are going to be lots of good people looking for work when everybody gets back to work.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Some will come from within dentistry, some will come from other industries, but suddenly you're going to have choices. So, that logic of, there's no real point in looking into these people too carefully because I don't have many choices anyway, is gone.
I'd hope that wouldn't be anyone's logic anyway, but I guess if you're
I've heard that a lot.
Wow.
if I do the things that you tell me to do before I hire somebody, David, they won't be available at the end of that.
Wow.
Let's talk about some of the other things before you hire somebody. In 2020, I will not hire anybody without looking at their social networking activity.
Yes, I've been doing that for years. I think it's so important. Yeah.
Well, glad you have. I think for some of the audience, that might be a little bit revolutionary.
Wow. Okay.
So let's talk about what we're looking for. I have a list, and I'll give you some things. You may have your own set of ideas. One of the first things I look for is anti-employer sentiment. The person who's bashing their current job and their current employer is going to do that to you next.
Oh, absolutely. I see
the moment
that all the time
in their perception, you step a little bit out of line.
Yeah, for sure.
Another one that I look at that's a little bit more subtle is the time of day when people post stuff. If they're posting during work hours, that's a time thief.
Oh, that's a good idea. I had never considered doing that.
And when you hire them, that's going to be the person who takes a half-hour bathroom break twice a day. And the rest of your staff are scurrying around doing their jobs while they're in chatting with their friends on their smartphone.
And that has such a bad influence for the rest of the staff because people start getting resentful. I've managed many teams where we had to deal with those sort of issues.
Well, and not just that, but then they start doing it themselves.
Yeah. Exactly.
That one spreads like cancer. So that's one that we look at. High risk lifestyle. The person who says on social media, because people will say this. I had a really good time Friday night, not absolutely sure how I got home.
What? Yeah, I suppose you're right.
Probably has no place in my office.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the things that people can look at, but you can learn a lot about somebody on social media.
And all this is legal to just look at someone's social media before hiring them, right?
It is.
It's all public information.
I personally would suggest that before you start this, you get their written consent.
Yeah.
Another suggestion I'll make for the orthodontists tuned in and office managers, if there are some, is you need an application form when people apply for work with you.
Yeah.
And there are several reasons for that. The first one is I find it much easier when everybody's information is presented consistently. So if I'm looking at 5 application forms and they're all set up the same way and everybody's filled them in the same way, I find it a lot easier to differentiate between candidates.
Oh, absolutely. That makes sense.
The second thing is, of course, that will stop you from stepping into boundaries of prohibited discrimination. For example, in most places, you're not allowed to discriminate based on age within a certain range, like age 18 to 65.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be asking people for their birth dates or the year that they graduated from high school.
Yeah, anything that infers it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. When you have an application form, of course, it's going to be designed in conjunction with your HR advisors, and they'll stop you from straying into those areas. And another thing that you can build into the application form is for the applicant to sign a consent for all the things you're going to do that require their written consent, like the criminal records check, like a credit check if it's related to their job, like looking on social media. So they can explicitly consent to the steps that you're going to do. But let's talk about the big one that we haven't talked about before.
Yeah.
Nobody should hire anybody without speaking to their former employers.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
And my rule is really simple. I want to talk to at least everybody they've worked for the past 5 years.
Sure. Okay.
When you do that, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. The big one is that the applicant may not want some of those conversations to happen because they think that they won't go well.
Yeah, of course.
So the first rule, Richie, is don't ever call any phone number that an applicant gives you.
Okay, what should you do then?
If they say that they worked for Dr. Smith in Akron, Ohio, Google is really cheap to use.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
Go online, find Dr. Smith, call that number. If you call the number that an applicant gives you, you may end up talking to their uncle on a disposable cell phone who pretends to be Dr. Smith and gives them a great review.
Yeah. All right. That makes sense.
Okay. The other one that you'll hear a lot from people is, please don't contact my current boss because she doesn't know I'm leaving.
Yeah, I think that would be very common.
And it might be true, or it might be that this person was actually fired 3 weeks ago. And this is their way of preventing you from calling somebody who's going to say, I would not hire that person again in 100 years.
Yeah.
So when you're faced with that, I know what most of the audience would have done yesterday. Yesterday, they would have said, okay. What I'd like them to say instead tomorrow is, look, I understand completely, and I'd certainly never want to get you in difficulty with your current employer. But I'm also going to tell you that we don't hire anybody without having that conversation. Now, in understanding your situation, I'm happy to put that to the very end of the process with you. But we do have to make that call before we hire you.
That's fair. You kind of put it in their court, and then you can see what their reaction is too.
Well, and if it's a legitimate request, you've understood and accommodated.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's not a legitimate request, you've told that person that at the end of the path they're going down is a brick wall. And what that'll prompt them to do is just disappear. I mean, you'll never hear from them again, which is exactly what should happen in that case.
Exactly. Yeah,
I mean, that's,
the process
that's
worked.
Yeah. So on the hiring side, those are some things that you can do. In terms of the rest of your practice, I'll give a few ideas.
Sure. Okay.
The first one is make everybody take vacation. No excuses.
Make them take vacation.
Make them take vacation. It's interesting. The month of March, which of course was when most ortho practices in the country ground to a halt, was one of our busiest months ever.
Wow.
And the reason was, a lot of orthodontists put their staff on furlough, and then they were in the practice doing stuff themselves. And suddenly they saw things.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So you're getting a lot of calls of discoveries and questions.
Yeah. Yeah. They're seeing things because all of a sudden it was down from a staff of 20 to a staff of 1. And the orthodontist was looking into some areas that he or she never had before. And they said, I don't like this. So we got a whole lot of calls in a short period. And that's why.
Wow. So if you're forcing them to take vacation, are you suggesting when they take vacation, they just kind of look through some of their activities?
One of the best windows for catching what somebody's doing if they're doing wrong happens when they're not there anymore.
Yeah. They've lost the control of it.
When they've lost control, when they can't. I mean, this wasn't an ortho case. One of the biggest cases I worked on in the first 5 years of my career came to light. It was a 2-periodontist practice.
Sure.
And it came to light when the office manager broke her leg skiing on the weekend.
Oh.
And so one Monday morning, for the first time in anybody's memory, she wasn't in the practice.
Mm-hmm.
And around 11:30 in the morning, one of the receptionists came into the senior of the 2 doctors and tapped him on the shoulder and said, I need to talk to you. And she brought him out of the operatory and she said, I've gotten 3 of these very strange phone calls this morning. And it was all patients and there was something wrong with their bill. And it was the same thing wrong with every bill.
Really?
And she said, that doesn't make sense. So she went to see the senior doctor and he listened to her for a minute and then he called me. And it was,
wow, it only took one afternoon for it to come to light just from the not.
Yeah, it took one afternoon. It was $680,000. Wow. So, which in those days, we're talking in the mid 90s. That was a really big embezzlement then.
It's huge. Absolutely.
It would be a big embezzlement today, but we see $1 million thefts today. We didn't then.
Oh, really? It's more prevalent. I mean, do the banks and insurance companies help protect you at all from this sort of activity? That's sort of my assumption, but
no, they don't. They're both big bureaucracies. They have lots of clients or providers in the case of insurance companies. I'll give an example that's a little bit outside of ortho, but I think most of our orthodontists will understand. One embezzlement case that we were involved in had the thief billing a patient's insurance company for work well beyond what was done. And we actually saw 14 root canals billed on a 12-year-old
What?
in a 1-month period.
Whoa.
But here's the irony.
How could that not like have red flags all over from the insurance company's side?
When I talk to people inside insurance companies, their systems for that stuff are so primitive.
That's surprising because I feel like if I do any transaction that's not normal for my debit card, I get an alert.
No, it took them over a year before they realized this.
Wow.
So no, they have other agendas, first of all, and secondly, they just have their own set of issues, and they're not the doctor's friend. And I don't think any of the doctors in the audience would be laboring under the misconception that insurance companies or banks are here to help them.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a point. Yeah.
But it's their systems just aren't set up to catch this stuff.
That's a shame. If anyone has any questions, now's a good time. I'm sure we have more to talk about.
Yeah, I'll grab my Perrier and
yeah. So are there anything else during the hiring process that comes to mind that you should look out for?
Don't look a gift horse in the bicuspids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking with former employers is really important. And we didn't talk, Richie, about what you should do when you do that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because the first thing is if somebody has fired somebody for embezzlement or, to say something that's topical these days, not following a CPSIS procedures properly or something like that, the person who fired them may be a little bit reluctant to talk about them. So how do we get the information that we need in that case? And I'll give a couple of suggestions. The first thing that you should do when you're speaking with a former employer is verify the person's job title and confirm their start date and end date.
Confirm their start date and end date. What's the purpose of that?
Well, let me talk about title first.
Yeah.
A lot of applicants for jobs give themselves that upgrade to first class.
Oh.
In other words, they worked in the last office and their job title was treatment coordinator, and now they're applying at your office.
Mm-hmm.
What did they say their last job was? Office manager.
Office manager, yeah, of course.
Right?
Okay.
So,
That's interesting.
There are situations where somebody with the title of TC is actually doing office manager work, but the way you present that with integrity is you say, well, I was the treatment coordinator at this last office, but then the office manager got sick and I ended up filling in for her, but I never got the formal title. That's how you would present that with integrity, not just put office manager on your resume, but a lot of people do.
Yeah. And if you're following up with the previous employer, you'd ask about that situation just to check it anyway.
That's right. So the first question I want to ask is about job title, because if somebody's kind of embellishing what they've done, that's an easy way to catch it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Start and end dates is really simple. Let's say that I work for Dr. A for 3 years.
Okay.
And either I'm not stealing or I am and Dr. A doesn't catch me. And then I leave that job and I go to work for Dr. B for 3 months. And she catches my hand in the cookie jar and she fires me.
Okay.
And now I'm applying at your practice. I'm okay with you talking to Dr. A because he thinks I'm good. But I can't let you call Dr. B because if that happens, I'm not going to get the job.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
So I need to find a way to make Dr. B disappear off my resume. And one of the easiest ways to do it is called the stretch. And what the stretch involves is I actually worked for Dr. A for 3 years, but if on my resume I put 3 years and 3 months and you don't catch it, now I succeeded in what I was trying to do.
Yeah,
so
it's such an easy thing to do that someone would overlook, right?
It is. And it may not be 3 months. It may be a stretch of 3 years. So the key for the audience is not to give the start date and end date and ask for confirmation. In other words, don't say to Dr. A, Susie says she worked for you from January of 2013 to April of 2016, because if you say that to most humans, their response is going to be, that sounds about right.
Oh yeah, you made it easy for them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Ask the open-ended question. What was this person's start date and what was their last day with you? And then you can compare that to the resume that you have. And if they're discrepant, now you know you have a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So don't use the forced choice here. The other question that I want you to ask a former employer is really simple. If this person was available and you had a position they were suitable for, would you rehire them?
That's a fair question.
Well, former employers are scared of being sued. So you don't want to say to somebody, no, I fired them because I caught them stealing, because if they go to court in 2 years and they get acquitted on some technicality, their next step is to sue whoever said that for slander.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you simply say, under no circumstance that I could imagine would I rehire that person, that's a statement about what you plan to do in the future. Nobody can sue you over that.
Yes.
So it's a safe question to answer, and that's why you should ask it. And the other thing is, anything other than yes, of course, means no.
Absolutely.
You know, if you get an answer that's somewhere in the middle ground there, that means no. It's just somebody who's scared or too polite to say it. By the way, that's also a good, safe way for you to give a negative reference on somebody. So you have somebody who stole from you or used the same set of gloves all day or whatever. All you have to say is, my attorney has told me to confirm employment dates for that person and only answer one other question. And that question is, would you rehire?
Interesting.
And whoever hears that's going to hear a pretty clear warning.
Exactly. Obviously.
So that's how to give a negative.
My producer's asking if there's anything called, you have a sort of honesty test available. Is that such a thing? Can people do that?
There's no psychometric test that will test somebody's honesty.
Yeah.
And the reason is because people lie in tests.
Right. Especially if they think that's what it's for.
I remember some company that does psychometric. By psychometric tests, we're talking about kind of behavioral tests. The DISC test that most of the audience has probably heard of is an example of a psychometric test.
Oh yeah, I've taken that. Yeah.
So, the DISC test assumes that people answer the questions honestly, and they really have no good way of measuring if you don't. So if you want to, if you want to show a different profile in DISC than you, then reflects your true nature, you can do it. You just have to recognize which questions get at that dimension that you're trying to emphasize, and then shift your answers to the questions.
And I imagine if you're a dishonest person, you're more likely to have that mindset to do such a thing.
That's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Dishonest people have a risk to lie. So I had somebody approach me about 10 years ago and say, they were very excited about this. These were psychometric people, and they were very excited about this. And they said, we have this test that will measure your level of honesty. I said, no way.
Yeah.
He said, no, we can prove it. I said, well, I'll prove you wrong. I'll take the test twice, and the first time I'll do it, I'll take it in a way that proves that I'm honest. And the second time I take it, I'll take it in a way that proves that I'm dishonest.
Yeah.
Last time I heard from them.
Really? Yeah, they didn't want you to show that.
Well, it's an inherent assumption in any test that is trying to measure behavioral attributes, is that the person wants them to be measured. And in this case, some people don't.
That's interesting.
So it's a great question, but no, there's no honesty test. I mean, I've seen certain people advocate testing people's honesty within a practice. And you construct a scenario where, for example, somebody at the front desk is handed cash that's non-accountable. And the classic case, and this doesn't really fit the ortho context, but just to describe it for people.
Yeah.
In a general dental practice, what you do is you get one of your friends to show up. You say, I'm so-and-so, I was in here 15 years ago and ended up not paying the doctor some money. And I've always felt bad about it. I mean, I couldn't do it at the time because of circumstance, but things are better now. And I'd like to pay the $300 that I've owed for the last 15 years. And you plunk in cash on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're trying to see is, does the receptionist pocket that cash or turn it over to the practice?
Yeah, you're kind of baiting the person to see.
Exactly.
Interesting.
But here's the problem with the logic.
Yeah.
If I'm stealing, the typical amount that a thief steals in a practice is normally somewhere between 2 and 4% of monthly collections.
That's quite a bit. That's the typical amount.
So I'm taking thousands of dollars a month.
Yeah.
And somebody comes in and drops $300 on my desk and says, here, what can I do with that money, Richie, that's going to get me the highest return on investment?
Prove that I'm trustworthy. Yeah.
The conspicuous display of honesty. Hand it to the doctor and say, look. So the problem is you can do this experiment and you learn less than nothing from it.
Yeah. In fact, it might push you the other way.
Yeah. What you can end up doing is believing somebody's honest where there's really no good reason for that belief.
Wow. That's fascinating.
You know, if the money disappears, you know you have a problem.
Yeah.
But if it comes back, you may or may not have a problem, and you really have no way of differentiating.
Wow. So I noticed you kind of split your services into 3 different areas. So you just tell us a little bit more. One is the diagnostic examination. What in general is happening during that time?
We do 3 things. We deal with doctors who have a question about whether somebody's stealing or not, and we will, and this is the important word in our process. Our process is stealthy. In other words, we do it in a way that those who are being investigated have no ability at all to know that we're on the job. So
and that is, I was watching some of your other interviews. I heard that is very important. That specific.
Yeah, certainly. If you're at the, well, if you're kind of at the stage where you don't really have strong suspicions, but you just want to know it's not happening, you don't want to go to your staff and say, look, I have questions about your honesty, so I'm going to have somebody come and take a look.
Yeah.
That will make staff meetings frosty for years.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
And that can be the least of your concerns. Yeah.
You know, when we get into the higher risk area, you don't want to frighten a thief because they may do something crazy to try to protect themselves.
Yeah.
So our investigation work is all done in a way that it's undetectable to staff. And I'm not going to talk here about the how, but certainly if audience members want to contact me privately, I'll have that conversation.
Yeah.
We also, when embezzlement has already been found, we are normally the primary investigators who give people like police and insurance companies the raw material that they need to do their stuff.
Okay.
And we will also help doctors set up their systems in a way that protect them a lot more than they are now. So those are the 3 things we do.
So if you're not sure, you can find out. If you know it's happened, you can kind of walk everyone through the process.
We can map it for you.
You can lower the chance that it's going to happen to someone.
Yeah, or the amount of time for which it will go undetected.
Ah, that makes sense. More time, more money, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if someone wants to get in touch with you, what should they do?
They can go to our website, and most people won't have trouble remembering it. It's www.dentalembezzlement.com.
Yeah, that's a good name.
The only trick in all that is spelling embezzlement correctly, but
Google will help.
Google can help. You can call us at our toll-free number, which is 888-398-2327.
Yep.
Or you can reach out at my personal email address, which is just david@dentalembezzlement.com.
Perfect. Great. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. I know I learned a lot. It's a scary world out there, but now's a great time to look into all of this, it sounds like.
It is. When we look at the constructive uses that the community that you and I serve can use can access right now.
Yeah.
This is a great time to put some safeguards in place, or if you have questions, to bring us in to have a look. We offer some special financing in the COVID era, so
Yeah.
we're quite prepared to work with orthodontists to fit within their cash flows.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Well, it's good talking to you.
You too, Richie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Take it easy and stay safe out there.
You too.